Season number 3 is now in the books here in the Denver Broncos franchise here on Madden 25. And unfortunately, it did not end how we could have hoped for, losing in the divisional round of the playoffs to the 16, or I guess now 17-1 Buffalo Bills. We stood tight against the best team in the league, but we could not get the job done. Unlike last year's playoff game, Bo Nix did not outplay Josh Allen. We ran the ball well, and we scored 26 points against a great defense, but we just could not get stops when we needed to. Khalil Shakir and Curtis Samuel were both very impressive, while the pass rush was not good. Baron Browning, who's had a great season, was non-existent. Nick Bonito was horrible. He played the worst game of his career. He fell flat on his face, literally and figuratively, in the fourth quarter. And then, of course, Andrew Thomas, the gift that keeps on giving, allowed 2 more sacks. We've got a big offseason upcoming for us, and today we're going to do everything up to the NFL draft. So we're going to go through the rest of this year, go through free agency, and our draft preview, in which we hold the 26th overall pick. We've got some big decisions to make on the offensive side of the ball with Bo Nix, who has the 5th-year option upcoming. This is our first big decision relating to his future. Along with that, we've got a pretty big list of guys due for extensions. Marvin Mims, our best receiver, is a free agent, along with Jordan Davis, Drew Sanders, Riley Moss, Cooper Kupp, Zamir White, etc. I think we're in a good spot financially because we can cut Mike McGlinchey, and then from there we will only have 2 other players making at least $20 million, Quinn Miners and Patrick Surtain. So before we get to anything, I do want to highlight the underclassmen in this year's draft who have just entered. A couple days ago, we had the offseason for the Kansas Dynasty, and we get to see which underclassmen officially will be entering the draft. So the players on the right side of the screen are the guys who were already in the draft class and are in fact declaring, including Jeremiah Smith out of Ohio State at the top of the list. In the middle, we have players who were not originally in the draft class but have been added, most notably Nebraska quarterback Dylan Raiola, who's projected as the 2nd quarterback in this year's draft. The players on the left are guys who we talked about. They were in the class, but they've decided to return to school, including Perry Thompson, a projected first-round receiver out of Auburn, and Arch Manning, the Texas quarterback who will be sticking around. So there is a bunch of new players who have entered the class, and we're going to highlight some of these guys today, especially the players projected early, including Dylan Raiola, who's projected as the 3rd overall pick and the QB2 in this year's draft class. But again, we'll be doing the draft preview towards the second half of the episode. Before that, we've got free agency. Before that, we've got the player re-sign period. And before that, I want to quickly recap our season. We have scrolled through the stats, but I haven't taken the time to actually talk about them. So I do want to do that real quick, and we start with Bo Nix. Certainly was not a perfect season for Nix, but I feel like overall he was quite good. And again, we're going to have to make our first big decision with him as the 5th-year option will be coming along. And the question with Bo Nix is, given that we know the ceiling is relatively limited with him, is this roster good enough for him to help lead us to a Super Bowl, much like the question around Brock Purdy in San Francisco? Can Bo Nix, who's maybe the 13th best quarterback in the NFL statistically, lead this roster to the Super Bowl? Is it easier to build a stacked roster with a quarterback like Bo Nix, or a solid roster with an elite quarterback like Patrick Mahomes? Through the ground, obviously, Ashton Jeanty was quite solid, finished in 3rd in rushing. Our receiving core was banged up this year. Marvin Mims and Tez Johnson were not healthy through an entire game with the exception of week 1. So if Mims were to re-sign, we're certainly hoping that those guys would stay healthier. Cooper Kupp, of course, also a free agent. I felt like he was a positive addition at the deadline. And then these young guys, Chris Brazzell and Harold Fannin, I'm excited for both of them to get a bigger role next year. The offensive line, of course, had its good moments and its bad moments. I think it was better as the year went along, largely because Andrew Thomas was on the field less due to injury. But we still got some questions to answer, specifically what we're going to do with Andrew Thomas after his horrible season with us. Do we trade him away? Do we cut our losses and move on? Or do we try to stick it out, recognizing his value is an all-time low at the moment? And then defensively, the heart and soul of this team, maybe not the case against Buffalo, but we still finished with a high sack total as a team. Mykel Williams, of course, was disappointing, but Nick Bonito put up the big numbers. Baron Browning was really good. And then in the secondary, Patrick Surtain led the NFL in interceptions. He was great. Colin Wright had a good rookie season, did not play well against Buffalo, but overall had a very solid campaign. And we can't forget about the linebackers, Jeffrey Bossa and Drew Sanders, who were fantastic. The back end of the defense was definitely the strength. But again, Drew Sanders is a free agent, as is Riley Moss. I do want to look at the stats across the league, and I think the most notable thing at the quarterback position is that QB play seems to be at an all-time high. Look at the amount of elite seasons here. Mahomes, Allen, Burrow, all would win the MVP in a normal year. Matthew Stafford and Dak Prescott possibly could as well. In terms of QB rating, Bo Nix is towards the middle of the pack, but I don't think that fully describes his season. For one thing, he played well in the big moments. He was great in the end of the regular season when we needed wins. He was great in the first round of the playoffs against Indianapolis. And he was statistically the second best rushing quarterback in the league after Josh Allen. Najee Harris won the rushing title. He also finished with the most touchdowns. Genty finished third in yards and then second in carries, only behind Devin Neal. I don't like that. I like having another back and a running back by committee. We have other talented players there. Zamir White. Obviously, Harrison Whaley was injured for most of the year. But I'd like to get a true compliment to Ashton Genty, the Robin to his Batman. Through the air, Jamar Chase led in catches, Trayshawn Holden led in yards, and Keon Coleman led in touchdowns. A lot of guys finished with an absurd amount of touchdowns. As for us, we have not had a 1,000-yard receiver yet in this series. Marvin Mims has been close, 900-plus yards all 3 seasons, and if not for injuries, he would have gotten 1,000 over each of the last 2. Kelvin Banks allowed the most sacks, and then defensively, as we know, Jeffrey Bossa led in tackles. Nick Benito led in TFLs. He finished in 4th in the AFC in sacks. And Patrick Surtain finished with more interceptions than anybody, with 6. He's not known as a ball hawk, but he was able to get a lot of them. Brian Bresee led the NFL in TFLs, while Micah Parsons had the most sacks, with Kayvon Thibodeau coming in second place. And then a few guys here at 5 interceptions, Budda Baker, Tariq Woolen, and Mikey Sainristil. As for the awards, Patrick Mahomes won the MVP, but again, you could have given it to about 5 or 6 different guys, which makes it all the more impressive that Bo Nix ended up on the list. He finished in 10th place, which shows how good he was. As for the other awards, Keon Coleman, Offensive Player of the Year. Benito comes in second for Depoy behind Max Crosby. For Offensive Rookie of the Year, Brazel and Fannin finished in the top 10, and that was with limited snaps. Imagine what they're going to do with bigger roles. Colin Wright came in 4th for the AFC Defensive Rookie of the Year. Not a lot of first-round picks on that list, interestingly. Bo Nix, 8th for Best QB. Genty, 4th for Best Running Back. No Marvin Mims for Best Receiver since he missed a large chunk of the year, but we do have Mike McGlinchey and Kevin Zeitler on the list for the Best Offensive Lineman, even though neither of them were starters. Nick Benito, Jeffrey Bossa, and Baron Browning, all in the top 5 for Best Linebacker. As I've said, I feel like Nick Benito should be 3rd in that group, but okay. Patrick Surtain wins the Best DB, and Will Lutz finishes towards the top in terms of the Best Kicker. In the NFC, Trayshawn Holden of the Falcons wins the Offensive Player of the Year. What a player he has turned into in both of his seasons with Atlanta. Him and Michael Penix have quite the connection. Avery Johnson, Offensive Rookie of the Year. As much as I want to be a hater, the Seahawks went from the 2nd pick to the 2nd round of the playoffs, so it's hard to argue with it. Thomas Davis wins the Defensive Rookie of the Year, the 2nd-round linebacker out of Appalachian State. Only one first-rounder on that list, Peter Woods, at number 9. So again, drafting outside of the first round, it's important, folks. A lot of good non-first-rounders this year. And then here is the list for the rest of the NFC. Let's now find out what happens through the rest of the playoff race. Who ends up winning the Super Bowl? We have maybe the most toxic conference championships we could have asked for. Buffalo and Kansas City, Mahomes versus Josh Allen, and then Dallas against the Eagles. Philadelphia looking to continue their Cinderella run. They've beaten, in my opinion, the 2 best teams in the NFC, the Rams and the Falcons, as we get a Chiefs and Cowboys Super Bowl. I really felt like this was Buffalo's year. They won 16 games in the regular season, but they fall short again to the Kansas City Chiefs. How many times do the Chiefs end up beating these guys in the playoffs? It's literally every season. Got to feel bad for Josh Allen and company at this point as Micah Hyde gets another interception. I feel less bad that he picked off Bo Nix twice in the divisional round. In the NFC, the Cowboys smothered Philadelphia 33-7. Jalen Hurts was not good. He did have a strong season, though, likely making the Eagles second-guess their decision to move up for Nico Iamaleava. But certainly not a great performance in this one. Look at Jake Ferguson and Brant Kuth, the 2 tight ends combining for 17 catches for over 170 yards. And then defensively, a few guys playing well, including former Kansas Jayhawk Devin Dye. He had an interception. So the Cowboys and Chiefs back in the Super Bowl for a second straight season. They will rematch. Here's a look at our Pro Bowl rosters. I don't think Bo Nix is ever going to make the Pro Bowl because at least one of Mahomes, Allen, Burrow, and Lamar Jackson is going to be left off every year. Do we think Bo is going to consistently pass them? We do have Ashton Jeanty making it. Very well deserved. I'm happy to see him get his first Pro Bowl nod. Quinn Miners gets in as well. Maybe not as deserved. And then on the defensive side of the ball, we end up with three. Nick Benito, Jeffrey Bassa, and Patrick Surtain. I've been critical of Benito's play this year, but he led the league in TFLs and had 14 sacks. It's hard to argue against that. And then Bassa and Surtain, both no-brainers. They were the two best players on our team this year. Now that we're in the Super Bowl week, this is where we get to find out who's gone up in development trait. We only had 3 players go up, but we went from 1 X factor to 4. No changes on offense. I thought there was a chance Jeanty would, unfortunately not. But look at the defense. A whole lot of red, including the rookie Colin Wright, who goes up to X factor. I didn't really see this coming, but now we have 2 X factors at corner, and then Baron Browning and Nick Benito go up. I figured Benito would, given the big numbers he put up. Baron Browning, I'm a little bit surprised about. I kind of thought that Jeffrey Bassa was going to move up. And remember, he won the stud of the year, so we already manually changed his development trait. So if the game were to have Bassa go up to X Factor, I would have taken it off and given it to the second place winner, which of course was Baron Browning. So I figured Browning would end up with X Factor, but I thought it would be because Jeffrey Bassa earned it and not Browning himself. But hey, same result, different path. So let's take a look at the Super Bowl now. We had the Lions winning in year 1. Dallas beat the Chiefs last year. Can the Chiefs get revenge? I like their chances. They've lost 2 games since we beat them in Arrowhead back in week 7. The Chiefs have played so much better since they started the year off pretty underwhelming. But Dallas won the whole thing last year. Now they will be without Micah Parsons, but they add Kyle Hamilton, who was not on the team last year. Devin Dye and Mello Dotson, the former Jayhawks, of course, with the Cowboys, so I kind of find myself pulling for Dallas. I'll be damned if I root for a division rival. And sure enough, the Cowboys win again. Back-to-back seasons, Dallas beats the Chiefs. Both quarterbacks were outstanding in this game. Donovan Edwards scores twice, and then look at the tight ends. Kuth had 135 yards in a score, while Ferguson had 81. And then Terrence Ferguson, 11 for 116. It's been the playoff run of the tight ends. CeeDee Lamb only had 2 catches, 1 for each of the 2 Super Bowl rings he now has, as Dak Prescott wins his second Super Bowl MVP. What does this do for the dialogue around Dak? Obviously, he's a Hall of Famer. That's not a question. But where do we rank him on the quarterback list? Probably number 5? Behind the big 4 of Mahomes, Allen, Lamar, and Joe Burrow. I sound like an Eagles fan trying to prop up Jalen Hurts, but Dak legitimately deserves it. He's been elite multiple seasons in a row. Back-to-back Super Bowl MVPs speak for themselves. Retirements, Davante Adams, Tyler Lockett, Matthew Stafford is done. Stafford's coming off the best year of his career. He's pushing 40, so it makes sense. But this is not because of production. It's just that he's old. The Rams have Shedeur Sanders. I think they'll be ready to move him in. Zach Martin is done, Levante David, Mike Evans, and then we lose 3 guys. Kevin Zeitler, Geno Smith, and Cooper Kupp. Zeitler and Geno were backups, not really big deals, but I do want to talk about Cooper Kupp, and I figured he wasn't going to be back next year. He would either retire or regress a lot, and sure enough, both of those things came true. What a career, though, for Kupp, the Offensive Player of the Year in 2021. 48 touchdowns over the last 3 seasons. Again, the production never truly fell off here. The Rams obviously traded him away because they wanted to feature their first-rounder, Noah Thomas, more in the offense. So that gave us the chance to add Kupp, who will not be a Hall of Famer. Mike Evans barely gets in, and then Davante Adams won't, which is insane. How is Davante Adams not a Hall of Famer? That's wild. Micah Hyde is done after 14 years. Again, that can't be because of production. He had 3 interceptions in his last 2 playoff games. Unk still got it, folks. Unk now is headed to retirement village, though. New mock draft up as well. Again, we'll focus on this a little bit more later, but here's a quick look. They have us picking KJ Sampson, the defensive tackle out of Florida State. We have a press conference here about the offseason. The media is going to be looking to ask us what our plan is. Last year I said we would make a splash, and we did that with Andrew Thomas. I don't want to force the issue. Let's try to win the draft. Let's get an impact player in the first 3 rounds. I think there are around 12 or 13 80-plus overall players in this class. So there's certainly a chance we end up with one, but far from a guarantee. Now into the re-sign phase, we have a players meeting storyline on the field. I don't know why anyone would be practicing on the field. It is February in the offseason. But hey, I respect it. Ashton Genty getting in those extra reps. He does not want to pay income tax anymore. Would you change that about me? I don't really care if you want to pay income tax or not, buddy. I don't even know why we're having this conversation because he has 2 more years left on his deal. But, all right, if you don't want to pay income tax, that's you, buddy. Move to a state that doesn't have one for the offseason. So here's our look at re-signings. As I said, we've got a lot of guys in here, but we've got a lot of money to spend. We have been cheap with our money so far, and, well, now might be the time to pay up. $135 million in cap space, and we'll start with Marvin Mims, who's an 88 overall superstar development. He is really, really good. The stats are not going to tell the full story. He has 0 1,000-yard seasons, but it's because he's missed 5 games in each of the last 2 years, and that in and of itself is a big talking point. He's missed a lot of time over the last couple of years, but when he's been on the field, he's been fantastic. I look at the first half of this season where he was the best player on our offense by far. From weeks 1 through 10, when he was healthy, he was dominant. Then he was banged up the last couple of weeks. He suffered the injury, and then he played a good game in the playoffs against Buffalo. I get, obviously, there are some medical question marks, but for me, this is a no-brainer. And I think the neutral offer right here, 4 years, around $91 million, is very fair. He has earned this contract given how well he's played, and he's not a guy who I want to let go of. I want Marvin Mims to be on this team for the long haul. So I think the neutral deal is pretty fair, and he says yes. Marvin Mims is sticking around, and look, I get it. It's a lot of money, but you need good receivers in this league, and Marvin Mims is a very, very good player. Once he stays healthy, the numbers with him are really going to show. Then we get to Bo Nix, 5th-year option time. And for me, I think it's actually an easier decision than you would think. Given where this team is, we're going to have a lot of guys to pay in 2 years from now. So if we push Bo Nix's contract extension a year into the future, we will have to pay him when he's 29 years old. And at that point, he's going to be a little bit older. He's going to really recognize that his upside is limited. So he's not going to ask for that much money in 2 years. He's still going to ask for a lot, but maybe not $300+ million. Unless he wins an MVP, which would be a great problem to have. So we're going to accept the 5th-year option. We are going forward, at least for the next 2 years, with Bo Nix as our starter. And then from there, we'll figure it out once we have a lot of the other guys in this core to pay, including the entirety of the 2025 draft class. Then we get to this group. These are going to be a lot tougher decisions for me. I knew I wanted Marvin Mims back. I knew I was accepting the 5th year for Bo. But what about these other guys? And we'll start with Drew Sanders, who missed all of season 1 with the Achilles injury, was solid last year, and I think he took a jump in production this year. He's an ascending young player who's only 25 years old, superstar development. There's a lot of room for him to continue to get better, and I think it makes sense to have him come back. But I don't want to give him a super long-term deal because, as I mentioned, 2 years from now, I think, is when the Super Bowl window with this core ends. We have a lot of guys to pay, including Jeffrey Bossa, who's better than Sanders. I don't know if I want to pay 2 off-ball linebackers. And he says no to the 2-year, $27 million extension. The franchise tag would cost $20 million. Then we get to Riley Moss, superstar development, talented player as well. But he's 27. He doesn't have as much room to grow as Drew Sanders does. I thought he had a solid season moving over to safety, but nothing spectacular. He wants only $6 million a year, but we would have to up the price given his low interest rate. And given that it's a solid safety class, we've got a lot of depth on the roster. I don't think we're going to offer him right now, but I'll keep my options open going into free agency. Jordan Davis, I thought, had a pretty solid season. He was really good at the end of the year, played great in the playoff game against the Colts. But he's also 27 years old. How much better is he going to get? I don't like the idea of paying $15 million for a rotational defensive lineman. So with us not agreeing to extensions for Davis, Moss, and Sanders, we can afford to use this $114 million into the franchise tag for Drew Sanders. So he's going to be getting paid a lot of money next year, $20 million, but I think it's worth it. Drew Sanders will be sticking around. Then we get to B.J. Ojulari. I feel like he wasn't really able to get his best foot forward here because his morale was so low because he was traumatized from playing in Arizona. The stats are not all that impressive, but I think with another year here as a rotational edge rusher, he could be pretty solid. 1 year prove-it deal for $7 million, and he is back. As for everybody else here, I don't think I'm going to offer them. I'm going to want a lot of these young guys back, but I'd rather sign them when they're cheaper in the preseason than right now. We've got some older guys in here who we're going to let go of. Jonnu Smith, Sam Mustipher, Cameron Hayward, Ben Powers. I don't mind bringing Will Lutz back, but I want to explore the kicker market. So those are going to be our extensions. Some interesting franchise tags here. I don't know what the Giants, Seahawks, and Titans are doing. Those are lowly undrafted players who just happen to have good development traits. I ended up fixing their contracts because there's no way teams are going to be franchise tagging 75 overalls just because they're superstar development. So that brings us into free agency. We're going to have nearly $90 million to spend. Let's take a look at the free agent class. The highest rated player is 87 overall, Aleem McNeil. Doesn't look like a star-studded class, but there is some talent in the trenches. So as I did some searching, there's really only one player I'm all that interested in, and he's right at the top of the list. Defensive line is not necessarily a need, but why not make a strength even stronger? Aleem McNeil of the Lions might be the finishing piece for our defensive line, especially with Jordan Davis gone. Obviously, he would play a bigger role than Jordan Davis because, well, he's better. He's coming off a really strong year in Detroit, 15 TFLs. The sack numbers aren't necessarily that big, but if he's able to clog rushing lanes, draw double teams, and open up opportunities for the other guys on the defensive line, then that would be really valuable. The defensive line is already strong, but again, it doesn't hurt to make that area of the team even better. Now, since he's the best player here, there's going to be a lot of teams interested in him, and we're going to have to offer a lot of money. As I said, I think we're working in a 2-year window right now, so I would prefer to offer him around 2 years. This deal would be 2 years and a little bit shy of $64 million total. Look, it's a lot of money, but Aleem McNeil is a really, really good player. Now, Seattle has the lead for him. I think the only way to get him would be to do 3 years, which I don't really want to do because we have to pay a lot of guys in 2 years. But we also want to be aggressive and fight for a Super Bowl, and if that's what it's going to take, then so be it. I'll offer Aleem McNeil 3 years for $99 million. Hopefully that's enough. I'm not willing to go any farther. If he doesn't want the 3 years and wants something longer in Seattle, then so be it. Since Aleem McNeil is really our only main target, we don't have to save much money. But we do have some cut candidates who are on 1-year deals, so I figure why not. I have been counting down the days since we're able to cut Mike McGlinchey. And finally, I think today is that day. We do not need to be paying a backup $23 million. So Mike McGlinchey will be getting cut. From there, I am ready to simulate the week. Let's hope for the good news. Will Aleem McNeil become a Denver Bronco and be potentially the one missing piece for the defensive line? Yes, he is! 3 years, $99 million. Welcome to Denver, Aleem the Dream. It's a lot of money, but look, this defensive line is going to be stacked. Baron Browning, Nick Benito, B.J. Ojolari, Jonathan Cooper, Mykel Williams, and now Aleem McNeil. Did I say Jonathan Cooper? Oh, wait, that's a lie, because we are trading him to the Minnesota Vikings. We don't need Jonathan Cooper on the roster, and he's coming off a down season last year where he only had 5 sacks, half of what he had in Season 2, despite playing more snaps. He was another cut candidate, but given that he's been a better player over the last 2 years than Mike McGlinchey, I figured we could get a little bit of value for him. So Cooper and a 7th will be going to the Vikings for a 5th and a 6th. Minnesota really only has one good edge rusher, Chris Hardy, who had 12 sacks last year, but they need another guy next to him, and Jonathan Cooper is a solid complement. Also a good locker room guy, team captain. I thought about trading Andrew Thomas as well. I explored the market. There was not a deal I liked. Obviously, his value has gone down quite a bit. I would say probably a 3rd to 4th round pick, given his struggles over the last few seasons, not just last year. But at this point, it's almost like, why not just keep him? His value is at rock bottom, so we might as well hope he can get back to his early career form. From there, we're going to simulate to the end of free agency because there's nobody else I want. We have a lot of good rotational players and depth at pretty much every position. Aleem McNeil was my one main target, and we got him. Through the rest of free agency, I thought about some of these offensive linemen, but we don't really need to pay an interior guy big money because we already are with Quinn Miners. I thought about Ronnie Stanley if we were to trade Andrew Thomas, but Staley is very injury prone. He didn't play at all last year, and he's 33 years old, ending up with the Giants. Riley Moss goes to Carolina. That's a good fit. Hopefully he does well there. Jordan Davis, meanwhile, I believe ended up with the New England Patriots, so he'll join forces with Jordan Birch and Christian Barmore. Justin Fields is a Ram, and Baker Mayfield is a Giant. That's quite interesting. So the Giants are going to get Mayfield to compete with their former top pick Malachi Nelson, while the Rams get Fields to compete with Shedeur Sanders for the starting job. Let's talk about trades across the rest of the NFL now. Denzel Ward headed to the Colts, a contending team in need of another defensive back. The Browns picking at number 2, potentially opening up a spot on the roster for Malik Muhammad, the corner from Texas. Antoine Winfield to the Bears for a big return, a 2, a 3, and a 4. Yes, he's a 29-year-old safety, but he might be the best safety in the NFL as a 97 overall. Javon Holland is going to New England for 2 threes. He's only 27 years old, superstar development. I cannot imagine the Dolphins like trading him in division, but there's a bigger plan behind this, and they're not done. Jalen Wright is going to the Giants, creating a Thunder and Lightning duo with Tyler Algier. The Dolphins are adding another third. The idea is that they're potentially looking for ammo to move up, particularly at number 2 with the Browns for a quarterback. The Ravens are going to be making a big move, trading away Roquan Smith to the Bucs. The Ravens have a lot of expiring contracts next year. Lamar Jackson, Zay Flowers, Justin Tucker, Nnamdi Madubuike, Roger Rosengarten, Nate Wiggins, and Roquan Smith. So they realize they've got to trade away some of these older guys, like Roquan, who's going to the Bucs, like Nnamdi Madubuike, who's entering our division to the Raiders. The Ravens have a lot of guys to pay, including Lamar Jackson, who's obviously the priority, but they also want to prioritize their young guys, like Zay Flowers, who's coming off a 1,200-yard season, along with Nate Wiggins, over the older guys who are going to regress. Marshawn Lattimore is going to the Bills. Buffalo lost some pieces in the secondary, so they'll be adding Lattimore. The Texans are in a similar spot as Baltimore. C.J. Stroud, Will Anderson, Nico Collins, and much of their young talent, all free agents. So they're trading Laramie Tunsil to Atlanta. Cole Kmet is going to the Seahawks. The Bears drafted Aronze Gadsden II in the draft last year. They like him a lot, so they don't really need Cole Kmet, who will now be catching passes from Avery Johnson. So that'll wrap up free agency and all of the trades across the league. Now it's time for the draft preview. We pick at 26 in the first, second, and third rounds. We have 2 5s and 2 6s, but no 4s or 7s. I think our roster is in a good spot because we don't have many glaring needs. Maybe we look to add a second running back, possibly another receiver with Cooper Kupp gone. I would say maybe a tackle we could look to add. Francis Mauigoa showed some flashes, but I don't want to lock him into the starting lineup. And then obviously Andrew Thomas is a wild card. Defensively, maybe one more pass rusher as depth. Safety's now a need with Riley Moss gone, but again, maybe that's Savon Revel. Maybe that's Javon McIntyre. There's not a specific position on this team that we have to draft early, so that gives us a lot of flexibility to go best player available. If there's a guy we really like at, say, the 16th pick in the first round, we can afford to move up because we have plenty of depth across the board, so we can be as aggressive as we wish. It's certainly a talented group, and I feel like this class is really filled out. At first, I thought it was going to be on the weaker side, but I think this is a really talented group. We got to see a lot of these guys really perform at a high level through the college football playoff. Certainly not as good of a quarterback class as we've seen, but there are 2 clear top guys and then a lot of question marks afterwards. So we'll start with Dante Moore. He entered the season as the projected number 1 pick, and that does not change. He led Oregon to the national title as a junior, won the college football playoff MVP. Did not do so again this year, but he still had a really good senior season and finds himself as the top prospect here. 6'3", 215, solid arm, very accurate. He can make all the throws. He doesn't turn the ball over. The Cardinals had the number 1 pick, and it's widely assumed that they'll draft him. I don't think Arizona is a great landing spot, to be completely honest, but that's what happens. Bad teams pick quarterbacks, and you hope that the quarterback will be able to develop despite the situation. Then we get to Dylan Raiola, a new entry for the draft. 38 touchdowns to just 2 interceptions this year. He has gotten better and better in his 3 seasons as a starter at Nebraska. The former top recruit has elite arm talent, better than Dante Moore. The high-level production and the winning is not on the level of Dante, but I think some teams will prefer Raiola. I'd be a little surprised if Arizona's one of them, but Raiola could go as high as number 2, with Cleveland potentially looking to move back. From there, the next question would be, does another quarterback go in the first round? And if the answer is yes, I think Ja'Cory Brown is the best chance to do so. Really good season at UCF this year, one of the most accurate quarterbacks in the country. Really good runner, 4.53 40-yard dash. He is explosive and dynamic on the ground. Did not look good in the playoff game against Clemson, but in the second biggest game of the year, the Big 12 Championship, he scored 50 against a great Arizona State defense. Jackson Arnold could go in the first round as well. Again, he did not look good, though, in his lone playoff game against USC, but he's coming off the best season of his career. He's really improved out of structure, on the run, and I think that's a reason why he could go on day one. From there, Malik Murphy, strong-arm quarterback from Duke. Jalen Rayner, inconsistent second half of the year from Arkansas State. Max Brown had a really good year, led Charlotte to the playoff, performed well in the playoff game, losing to this guy, MJ Morris, who led the Maryland Terrapins to the national championship, and that pushes him all the way up into the fourth round. Now, there are some questions with him because he will be 25 years old when he makes his NFL debut, but the NFL doesn't care about your age that much. If you can ball, you can ball. His ceiling may be limited, but he was so impressive in the playoff. He made every throw in the book. He was connecting on bombs, 50-plus yards down the field in every game. Was not particularly impressive in the national championship against Notre Dame, but in the other three games, he was phenomenal. Behind him, some names to watch out for, in my opinion, included Johnny Shepard. He's still got a ways to go, but he has improved significantly every season at Rutgers. Zion Turner from Miami had a really strong senior season. Noah Fifita from Arizona, very similar to Dylan Gabriel. He's very accurate, very productive, but has some clear physical limitations. As we move over to the running back position, it's a really talented group. Maybe not as deep as the year one running back class, but it's a little more top-heavy with as many as three potentially looking to go in the first round with Dante Dowdell, Jeremiah Love, and Darius Taylor, who all make very compelling arguments. We'll start with Dowdell, who's projected as the number 2 prospect despite being a running back. That must mean that this guy is generationally good. And that's exactly the case. Dante Dowdell is 6'2", 225 pounds. He's tough. He's physical. 26 bench press reps, 5th amongst running backs in this class. He runs a 4.3 as well. He's big, strong, fast, and productive. He won the rushing title this year in Nebraska. He was consistent this year, nearly 7 yards a carry. I mean, he checks off every box you look for at the running back position. He makes plays in the passing game. He's a flawless prospect, essentially, and will go in the top 5 despite his position. Jeremiah Love had a great playoff run, pushing him as the second best running back prospect in the class, and he carried his momentum into the combine. 4.28 40-yard dash, 4.05 20-yard shuttle. This kid can fly. He is a big play waiting to happen. Darius Taylor from Michigan would have won the rushing title this year if not for a groin injury that sat him through the second half of the year. He did win the rushing title a season ago and was the best running back in the country as a junior and could have been again as a senior had he not gotten injured. I don't think the injury was fully healed, though, at the combine. He did not have a great workout, 4.56 40. That's pushed him into the second round, but he's too good to go any further. He was playing at an unbelievable level before the injury, averaging around 125 rushing yards per game before getting injured. A lot of guys here on day 2 to look out for. I want to keep my eye on Trayvon Dunbar, who just entered the class as a redshirt sophomore, 5'10", 205. He's not the fastest. I would say he's quicker than fast, though. He's got great footwork, can make you miss, but he can also put his shoulder down and ram through you. Some other guys to watch out for include L.J. Martin, had a good final stretch of the year. John Randall Jr. from Utah recently declared, missed the second half of the year with an injury, but played well prior. C.J. Baxter of Texas missed the entire year with injury, but he looked good at the combine, pushing his stock up. He looks healthy and ready to rock and roll for training camp. At wide receiver, it's a deep class, but not particularly top-heavy. Only one guy projected in the top 24, and that's Jeremiah Smith out of Ohio State. Big physical specimen, 6'3", 220 pounds, 4.46 40-yard dash. Again, checks off all the boxes physically. The production's been a little inconsistent in his 3 years at Ohio State, but he's still been a really good player. 3,000 yards roughly over his 3 seasons in Columbus. He's going to go in the top 10. He's going to be the wide receiver 1 in this class. When we were struggling early this year, I thought he was going to be a target for us, but obviously we won too many games for that to happen. 21-year-old junior TJ Moore has just entered the draft. Really good player over the last 2 seasons for Clemson. The Tigers have 3 top projected 100 picks in this class. I think Moore will be the first off the board. 4'4", 340, 39-inch vertical, 3.95, 20-yard shuttle. Pretty much 1,000 yards over each of the last 2 years. And then we get to Nick Harbor, who to me is polarizing. The production was very inconsistent prior to this year, where in the high-octane Maryland offense, he was quite effective, finishing nearly top 10 in receiving. In the Florida first-round playoff game, he took over. 7 catches for 290 yards and 4 touchdowns. Since then, he was inconsistent over the last 3 games, had 3 drops over the last 3 playoff games as well. And he had a good combine. 4.37 at 6'5", 240 is really damn good, but he was supposed to run in the 4.2s. He did not quite meet the expectation of his time. Harbor left the playoff and the combine with a lot more questions than answers for teams, in my opinion. The complete opposite can be said for Jaden Greathouse, the number 1 overall riser in the playoff. He was projected as a 7th rounder when we went through the receivers earlier in the year. Now he's in the running to go in the first round. He played really, really well in all 3 of Notre Dame's playoff games. This guy can separate an elite level. He can stretch the field, and he carried over the momentum to the combine. 4.45, 40. Impressive for someone of his build. 6'1", 220. He plays big. He plays physical. He's a magnet in the red zone, and someone who I think teams are going to fall in love with through the pre-draft process. Cam Coleman, former 5-star recruit, turned into a good but not great player at Auburn. He was outshined by Perry Thompson, who would have been a first-rounder had he decided to not stay in school. But Cam Coleman has still been a really good player with the Tigers, had a good showing at the Combine, and given the athletic measurables and the flashes he has shown with the Tigers, he still looks like a top 50 pick. Jurion Dickey of Oregon is a guy who's played really well over the last 2 years. He obviously was a huge piece of their championship run a couple years ago. The combine numbers don't pop off the page, but he was projected to test lower. So his stock went up in Indianapolis, and he did really well on the on-field drills as well, pushing him into the second round and possibly the top 50. Antonio Williams, the next Clemson receiver, is on the list. 6'1", 195, savvy senior who has a variety of ways he can get open. He's fast, he's twitchy, and his 3.88 20-yard shuttle time is the best amongst receivers in this class. He's got great short area quickness. Down the board, Malachi Coleman, big, physical, athletic receiver from Nebraska. Denzel Boston from Washington tested well. Braden Wisloski from Maryland was projected to go undrafted, but he led the country in receiving and ran a 4.3 at the Combine. It's hard to say no to that. The guy I really want to talk about in this group, though, is Xavier Jordan from USC. He's the most polarizing player in the entire draft for me. On one hand, the guy won the Heisman Trophy. The production is obviously there. It's top 5 pick worthy. On the other hand, he's 5'10", less than 180 pounds, and he barely ran a 4.6. He has undraftable NFL traits and athleticism, but he has top 5 production. So what do you do with him? I think he's going to be very polarizing for scouts. Some teams are going to love him, other teams are going to hate him, and because of that, I think he's going to go earlier than this 78th projection. It only takes one team to fall in love with him, and he was so good throughout the year. He was inconsistent in the playoffs. Teams bracketed him deep. He wasn't able to stretch the field. USC was able to use him in the short game a lot against Maryland, where he had 9 catches. Obviously, they lost that game, but it wasn't really his fault. Zachariah Branch, speedster from USC, had a good end of the year. Ryan Williams had a strong combine, only 20 years old, pushes himself maybe into the top 100. Let's move over to tight end now. I don't want to spend too much time here because it's a horrible tight end class, and I don't think we're going to draft one. But I do want to mention Jake Johnson had a good combine. He pushed his stock up. Donovan Green, though, was inconsistent down the stretch, did not have a good combine, and he pushed his stock quite a bit down. On the offensive line, a potential need for us, given our questions at tackle, someone like Raymond Pulido from Arizona would answer a lot of those questions. 6'6", 335, phenomenal pass blocker. He is powerful and will run you over in the run game. Really physical, really big player. I don't think he's going to fall to our 26th pick, but if he does, it'll be hard not to consider him. Cage Casey from Boise State, another blindside pass protector who's done really good as their starting left tackle over the last few years for Maddox Madsen, and before him, Malachi Nelson, somebody who I think also goes in the first round. Howard Sampson from UNC is a pretty solid player, but I want to look at Charles Jagusa from Notre Dame, another heavy riser. You're going to notice this with Notre Dame. They won the championship for a reason. There's a lot of guys whose stocks went up, including Jagusa, who also had a great combine. 41 reps on the bench, tested well in the lateral movement drills, and he has pushed himself into the top 50 conversation. When we last talked about him, he was barely in the top 150. At right tackle, Daughtry Richardson and Tree Babalade project to go in the first round. Richardson at 6'5", 321 is one of the better pure pass protectors in this class. I don't think he's a special athlete, though. I think that limits his ceiling. But this guy can block, and he will not let the quarterback go down. Tree Babalade, I think, has the higher upside of the two, but he's a little less polished. He's a better athlete, and he's bigger. 6'6", 337. He really lives up to his name because he is built like a freaking tree. I mean, literally, he's a giant. Behind them, KD Arnold was inconsistent down the stretch and did not have a great combine. His stock went down. Andre Roy Jr. of Clemson, an undersized guy who did not play well in the playoff, his stock went down. As we move over to the interior, solid group here led by Olaviega Ione from Penn State, a French first-rounder. There are a few guards in this range, so I think that could push him back a little bit, but he's highly productive. He's quick on his feet, and he benched 40 reps on the bench with a 33-inch vertical. Behind him, Solatoa Moai from Utah is really good, and Christian Williams from Florida, he saw his stock go up. I want to see more from Caden Green, though. He was the highest-rated player in the country this year, but he didn't play like it, projecting him in the 5th round. At right guard, Olas Elinen, the native of Finland, has declared for the draft. He's coming off a great season for Alabama, only let up 2 sacks, possibly could go in the 1st round. I think he's got more upside than Ty Chan, but Chan has unbelievable production, 3-year starter at Notre Dame, and he has allowed the same amount of sacks as you and I. 0. His stock didn't really go up, though, because it was already high to begin with, but another big reason why they won the national championship. Aliou Ba from Maryland had a good combine. He was up and down in the playoff, but had some good moments. And then Zach Rice from UNC, former 5-star recruit, had a great combine, and his stock went up. At center, Ayapani Laulu from Oregon had a great season, did not allow a sack this year, arguably the most consistent center in the country, and I think he separated himself from the other centers in this class. But Grayson Maines from Temple is a good player. Mark Nobu Jr. from A&M had a great combine. His stock went up quite a bit. As we move over to the defensive line, not really a need for us, but as I said, I kind of want to add one more player. It's a loaded defensive tackle class. I would say the strongest position group in this draft. 5 potential first-rounders as we start with Jason Moore out of Ohio State, who's by far the best athlete of the group. 4'7", 540, 7-second 3-cone, 4'6", 20-yard shuttle. Dude's a freak at 6'6", 305, and the production has really started to back it up over the last year or two, pushing him into the top 10. Guys who are as big as him should not move like him. Gabriel Brownlow-Dindy of Texas A&M has been really solid over the last couple of years. The numbers are down this year because many of Texas A&M's great linemen are in the NFL, and he's taken on the double teams, but he's still a very good player. Keanu Tanuvasa, 4 sacks in the season opener for Utah, carried the momentum the rest of the way, and he tested really well at the combine. I was surprised to see how athletic he was, cementing himself in the 1st round. A couple more guys could go in round 1, including Tyson Ford from Notre Dame, another playoff riser for the Irish. I'm still convinced he's related to Travion Ford, who we're going to talk about in a minute. But Tyson Ford was really impressive. He popped in the games we watched with Notre Dame, making an impact, making offensive line struggle, making plays in the backfield, and he looked like a first-rounder out there. Then there's KJ Sampson from Florida State, a 1-year starter, but he looked good. With 8 sacks this year, a quickly rising player. I think the sky is the limit for him, and he could end up going in the 1st round as an underclassman. Behind them, Terrence Green from Oregon, good run defender. Caden Cashin, 12.5 sacks for USC, but he's undersized and a little bit unathletic. Grayson Holton tested really well, and then on day 3, if you're looking for a high floor player, I think you can get one. Ahmad Moten Sr. from Miami, never going to be a star, but he's going to be a good player. Jaden Cofield from Texas A&M, recently declared for the draft. Again, he's never going to be great, but he does the dirty work. At right end, 3 guys slated to go in the 1st round. We'll start with C.J. Madden, the top projected defensive end, who led the FBS in sacks this year of 21.5. That's a lot. He tested well at the combine, 4'6", 40, 4'6", 20-yard shuttle, nearly a 30-inch vertical, nearly 30 reps on the bench. The one question with him is his size. 6'4", 230. He's undersized. But we just saw Thomas Davis, who is 6'1" and weighs less, win the Defensive Rookie of the Year coming off the edge for the Philadelphia Eagles. If he can make it work, so can C.J. Madden. And I think because of that, he goes in the top 10. Eno Etta from Michigan is fascinating. He was projected as a mid-first rounder when we last talked about him. I thought he played really well in the playoff. In both games that we watched him, he was impressive. He was a disruptor in the matchup against Kansas. But as you can see here, he skipped the combine, and there's a reason for that. He was not healthy. The medicals are a major red flag for him. In both of Michigan's playoff games against Kansas and Notre Dame, he could not stay on the field. He was constantly getting banged up. He probably had to be taken out of the game 3 separate times in both of those matchups. The health is a real concern with him. If not for that, he'd be a top 15 pick. But the medicals have pushed him down the board. Could it be worth it for a team like Denver at the end of the first round to take a risk, even when they don't need an edge rusher? The talent might be too much to pass up, because if he's healthy, I think he's one of the 10 to 15 best prospects in the draft, at worst. Marion Winston from Oregon is an interesting case because he doesn't really have a lot of positive momentum right now. I don't think he was particularly impressive in the playoff game against Clemson. He was a little disappointing at the combine, but teams still see the body of work over the years. He was really good in their championship run a couple years ago, and because of that, it's going to be hard to keep him out of the first round. Moving over to the left side, a lot more depth here as we start with Travion Ford from Kansas. We've got a front row seat to see how good he was this year. 12.5 sacks, 23 TFLs, won a lot of awards as one of the best defensive players in the nation. 6'3", 275. He's not necessarily fast and doesn't have great get-off coming off the edge, but he's powerful. 31 reps on the bench, but he's explosive as well. 32.5-inch vertical jump, third best amongst left ends in this class. I did not expect him to jump that high. Keldrick Falk from Auburn was really impressive at Lucas Oil for the combine. His stock has gone up and has pushed himself above some of these other guys like Landon Dean, Mateo Uyunglele, and Will Helt, and potentially could go in the first round. All those guys, though, very talented in their own rights. And then Cam Franklin, a 21-year-old junior, only 8 career sacks, but a big kid with great athletic traits, and you know NFL teams love upside. Let's move over to linebacker now. We'll start on the left side where it's a lot worse. I do want to talk about Tavarua Tafiti. Led the ACC in sacks this year. Kid can get after the quarterback. He isn't a great athlete, though, and he's not particularly big, 6'2", 240, so there's a question of how he will translate in the NFL. But the guy can get after the quarterback. His production's going to keep him in the first 2 rounds, despite not having high-end traits. Right outside is where there's a lot more talent, though, including some freaks. Gabe Harris, freak. Anthony Hill, freak. Devin Jackson, extra freak. 6'2", 250, 4.41 40-yard dash, 4.45 20-yard shuttle, sub-7-second 3-cone. Oregon used him the same way they used Jeffrey Bassa a couple years ago, as someone who's good in coverage, good in the run game, but can blitz after the quarterback. And we've seen how good Jeffrey Bassa has translated into the NFL. Jackson is even more athletic, and that pushes him in the top 10. Anthony Hill Jr. to me is fascinating. He can do a little bit of everything. Hand in the dirt, can go after the quarterback. As an off-ball linebacker, he can cover, he can stop the run. He's a jack of all trades, master of none. But that can work against you as well, because if you don't have that one specific skill that you're elite at in the NFL, other guys are going to pass you. Nonetheless, he's an extremely versatile player who, in the right system, I think can be really good. Gabe Harris is an ascending young player, only 22 years old. 6'4", 260, rotational pass rusher turned elite pass rusher. He had a great season this year for Georgia and looks the part of an NFL player. DJ Wesolak from Oregon State, certainly not the athlete that those first 3 guys are, but the dude can get after the quarterback. Sack numbers were lower this year, but given his body of work, I still think he goes in the first round. Antonio McCullough from Michigan was projected here originally, was great in the playoff, but was not great in the combine, offsetting that. Garrison Madden did test really well, 4.45 40, more of an off-ball guy who can also play with his hand in the dirt a little bit. I really like him and think he could be a steal towards the end of the second round. Moving over to middle linebacker, another strong position group for this class. It would certainly be an interesting discussion of who the top middle linebacker would be if not for Raylan Wilson. This dude is a freak show. 6'1", 240, 4.44 40-yard dash, sub 7-second three-cone. He's used a lot like how Devin Jackson is, as a blitzing linebacker who can also really cover, rangy sideline-to-sideline linebacker. And I think he's got the IQ and awareness to be a consistent player. That's the issue for a lot of these ultra-athletic linebackers. Sean Murphy from Florida State is a little undersized. He's not a freak athlete per se, but he's an all-around good player. He can cover. He can stop the run. Really, really talented player who I think could make his way into the first round. And then you've got this big cluster of guys. It's a very deep group. Tariq Al-Uqda from Washington State's very talented. Torian York from A&M had a good year, didn't test overly well at the combine. Jake Gassaway from NIU, I think he's a big sleeper. But I want to talk about Arvell Reese from Ohio State. 6'4", 240 pounds. His coaches rave over him. He has unbelievable football character and is described as a football genius. Even though linebacker is not a need at all for us, it never hurts to add more high-character guys in the building. His coaches describe him as a guy who could be a team captain in the NFL as a rookie, and that says something. I think that could push his stock up a little bit, especially for bad teams looking for culture resets. Let's move into the secondary. Seems like every year is a good corner class, this year included. And I like the safeties as well. Multiple guys who probably end up in the first round, which is useful because I think safety is a need for us. Corner is not a need, but I do want to highlight these top players, including Malik Muhammad, who has been a shutdown corner for Texas the last few years. Checks off all the boxes. Ball skills, cover ability, top notch. He's a solid athlete, and he has solid size, but nothing spectacular in those regards. So I think that limits his ceiling a little bit. But in terms of production, he checks off all the boxes. Then we get to Daniel Harris from Georgia, who was originally the CB4 in this class, but he's moved up for two simple reasons. 6'3", 4.35 40. He's had to sit behind a lot of really good corners at Georgia, such as Dalen Everett, Julian Humphrey, Matthew McDoom. He's gotten a chance to play, and he's been really good. Factor that with his freakish athleticism, that sounds like a top 15 pick. Christian Gray from Notre Dame was awesome in the playoff. He had the big pick six in the national championship game against Maryland. That was the play where Notre Dame was really able to get some momentum and put the game away. Christian Gray tested well at the combine too and has been really good throughout the entirety of the season. But his playoff run, covering some really good receivers, he stood out against first-round guys. Calvin Simpson-Hunt was originally the cornerback number 2. He moves down to CB4 to no fault of his own. Daniel Harris and Christian Gray just happened to pass him. Simpson-Hunt is a zone-specific corner. I think he needs to get drafted to the certain scheme, but if he goes to a good fit, I think he'll be quite good. Jamari Sharp from Indiana is a really intriguing player for me. 6'2", 4.37 40-yard dash. His teammate, Jamari Pons, led the NCAA in interceptions with 8. There's a reason why he got all those interceptions, though. Teams kept throwing him the ball because they kept it away from Jamari Sharp. And again, you can't teach that size. You can't teach that speed. You also cannot teach 4.29 speed, which is what Smith Snowden brings to the table. A little bit smaller, 5'10", 190, but high-level production, and then track-level speed. All 6 of those guys have the case to go in the first round. But again, I don't think we're going to draft a corner at all this year. Down the board, I do like Dante Balfour from Charlotte. D'Angelo Pons, as I mentioned, a lot of interceptions this year. Roderick Pleasant, 4.28. Jaden Marshall, very talented, sticky man-to-man corner. Oliver Bridges from Buffalo, I think, is a big sleeper. Braden Lee from Maryland. He's skinny but talented, only 21 years old. Let's move over to safety. Big position of need for us. After last year's class, I didn't think we would see another safety in the top 3 after Caleb Downs, and I might have been wrong. Dylan Thieneman might be the best defensive player in this draft. The guy can do everything. 6'3", 200. He can cover. He can stop the run. He does it all. You can line him in the nickel. You can line him in the box. You can line him as your deep center field safety. I don't know if he does end up going top 5, but he certainly could. Don't think we're going to land him, but we could land one of these guys, including Khalil Barnes from Clemson. He first caught my attention when Clemson played against Kansas a couple years ago. I thought he had a really good game, and every time we've watched Clemson since then in the playoffs, he stood out. The guy's a playmaker. He has a knack for the football. The question with him, though, is the athletic traits. 4.56 40-yard dash, only 18 reps on the bench. He tested solid overall, but I think the upside is limited. Nonetheless, he's battle-tested, big game player. When the lights are the brightest, Khalil Barnes is at his best, and because of that, I think he could go in the first round. Kamari Ramsey, I think, has more upside, though. He's bigger, 6'1", 205. He's a little bit more athletic as well. He tested better in most of the other drills of the combine, and the production really hasn't been that much worse. So say we're in the late first round, we really want one of these safeties. There's a real argument for Kamari Ramsey. I think he's got the higher ceiling than Khalil Barnes, even if he's a little worse right now. Dalton Brooks from Texas Tech, good player on his own right, could go in the top 100. And then as we move to strong safety, no Dylan Thieneman projected in the top 5. But there are some more names to watch, including former 5-star recruit Peyton Bowen from Oklahoma. Bowen is coming off a strong season this year, another guy who lines up everywhere. Nickel, linebacker, free safety, strong safety, and that's because, like Dylan Thieneman, the guy can do it all. He's a little bit worse across the board than Thieneman in just about everything, but he is still an A-level safety prospect who very well could go in the top 20 despite positional value. Ryan Yates from TCU, his stock has really gone up. He put on a show at the Combine. 4.34, 40-yard dash with nearly a 40-inch vertical. Both were best in the safety class, and it was not particularly close. The production is pretty solid. Another very versatile player who wears a lot of hats on the TCU defense. He played a lot in the box for them and was really solid. Brendan Jordan from Texas Tech also could go in the top 100, as could Zion Branch from USC, the brother of Zachariah Branch. So that's your draft class. Really, really talented group of players. Should be interesting to see what we do 26th overall. I'm curious to hear your thoughts down below in the comments. Let's take a look at these mock drafts, shall we? We'll look at 3, the first of which is mock draft 3. This one was set up after the regular season, so obviously a lot will have changed since then. Eno Etta, for instance, at number 3 overall. Could be worth it if not for the medical, but obviously that's a big thing for him. Interestingly, they have Peyton Bowen ahead of Dylan Thieneman. That's fascinating to me. As for us in the first round, they have us picking CJ Madden. Sounds good to me. He's not going to make it that far, though. Jeremiah Smith as well at number 22. He will not make it that far. Mock draft number 4 was made around the time of the Super Bowl once the new players were added. They don't have Dylan Raiola in the first round, though, which makes 0 sense to me. They have us picking KJ Sampson, the defensive tackle out of Florida State at this spot. Talented player. I think with Aleem McNeil, though, that doesn't seem as likely. And then this last mock, Jason Moore, number 2 to Cleveland. Again, I think they're a trade-down team for Dylan Raiola, who does not go in this mock draft. I don't know why. Obviously, he's going to be a top 3 or 4 pick. I don't know what Madden is thinking. They have us picking KJ Sampson again. Good player. Value is fine. But with Aleem McNeil, again, I don't think it makes a lot of sense. And that was after we signed Aleem McNeil, so I don't really know what Madden's thinking there. But that'll wrap up the episode. Hope you guys enjoyed. A long one. We had a lot to cover today. Next time around will be the 2027 NFL Draft. And again, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on what we should do down below in the comments. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new. Broncos Country,